Patrik Laine is
Yeah, good
officially
news.
out of the NHL and NHLPA Player Assistance Program, which is great news for him personally.
Yep.
Am I nuts for thinking that a reunion with the Winnipeg Jets might be great for both the player and the team? Where are you on all of that? Is this just a pie in the sky crazy idea that I'm talking about right now? Or could there have some legs to this, considering what he's been through and what he would bring to the table if he was back in a Jet jersey at some point?
Well, Huss, I mean, I know it's certainly a topic that has Twitter aflutter today, and again, it's not totally pie in the sky thinking. No doubt, there was some buzz around the draft already, Huss, that maybe that was maybe potential of one of the preferred destinations if there's a trade that happens. Again, secondhand information, but it wouldn't be a surprise if we want to go through the chronology of events here. I mean, you had a very good marriage early on. Things got a little bit rocky when it came to negotiations. A young player with a lot of confidence, a strong-minded player, wanted to get paid big dollars and decided he wanted to get paid those big dollars elsewhere. Things didn't transpire exactly the way that he wanted out in Columbus. And, the guy he was traded for didn't work out perfectly for him either, as it turns out. And both of them, one of them has a second address and the other one is searching for the next one. So for me, Huss, this isn't just a nostalgic type of scenario here. It would make sense if you're Patrik Laine now at the age that he is at, with 2 years remaining on his deal. Would it make sense to me that he would like to recapture some of that magic in a place where he played his best hockey? I know there's some folks who make the argument that his best hockey was, he was around a point a game player with Columbus before he was hurt, but his best hockey was here. He was known as a generational goal scorer. I think it was 110 goals in 3 years, including the 44 snipes as a sophomore player, as a 19-year-old. So would it make sense that you would like to rekindle some of that magic? It's where, we know how much fire and passion for the game Patrik has from being around him, Andrew. And I know that, he was a guy who was very self-deprecating at times, but make no mistake, the guy loved being around here. Winnipeg is good. I'm sure somebody still got a box of T-shirts somewhere, Huss, in a storage area somewhere that they would love to break out and maybe have a chance to help the personal economy. But honestly, it would be something that makes sense. But let's also not forget how complicated a deal of that magnitude would be given the numbers that are involved. The 8.75 is primarily what we're talking about here, right? So could the Jets afford it if they got it down to 6 even? I mean, preferably 5, but maybe 6. Well, sure. But there's got to be money moving out, even if there is some level of retention. And now you're going to get into the tug of war of, the Blue Jackets are saying they want to trade Patrik at his point per game rate, and other teams are saying, well, no, we're not quite sure what we're getting, so we're not giving you a top prospect and a first rounder. So the negotiation phase with Don Waddell will be interesting. But, as my pal Elliot Friedman is reporting, Columbus has given the green light for teams that are interested to sort of start sniffing around here. So, and also important to remember in Elliot's report today that Patrik has been cleared from the program, which is, as you mentioned, tremendous news, but he is still recovering and working his way back from a shoulder surgery. Yeah. So that complicates matters as well. But I mean, hey, I've seen the tweets, Huss. I've seen the stick twirls, and hey, as someone who enjoyed when Patrik filled the notebook, hey, it would be an amazing story. Is it going to have the storybook ending? That I'm not certain about. But what I can tell you is this: when Patrik is in a good place mentally and physically, he's a dominant force. I mean, I know I see a lot of tweets about one-dimensional player. I mean, hey, when you lose your way, sometimes things aren't going as smoothly. Like, there have been plenty of times. Again, I'm not out here to say Patrik Laine is going to become Alex Ovechkin and chase the record for goals, but this is a guy who is in a 6'5" frame and occasionally wasn't afraid to use it. Could he have used it more often? Sure. Is he going to be a Selke candidate? No. But this is a guy who immediately makes any power play that he's on better. 30 plus tucks is not an easy thing to do in the NHL, Huss, at any time. So could I see an argument for the Jets having some interest? Of course, but a lot of things would have to fall into place. And again, it was one of the mailbag questions Mike McIntyre and I are attacking for the Free Press in the article that's going to go up Sunday. So I'd be curious to see what the cool bet lines would be saying, Andrew. But again, I'm not here to.
It depends who's setting the line. Is it the people in our chat right now, or the people in my inbox, or maybe some other people? Like, I'll just make the argument that you can look at any possible landing spot for Patrick.
Of course.
With what he's been through over the last couple of years, with his history, with where he's at right now, I think it makes a ton of sense for him. And listen, we have heard that he is high on that idea. If that is the case, you've got someone that is willing and wanting to get back into the organization. Listen, I think it's quite clear that in a lot of ways, this entire ordeal has probably changed him in somewhat. I imagine it's been humbling. And I also think that, he's going to be a guy that comes back with an incredible desire to reestablish himself as a star in the National Hockey League. And if you're able to, for all intents and purposes, buy low on a guy like that, with 2 years left on the contract, never mind what it would do to the fan base. And I think as far as putting a few more asses in seats, like, I think there's huge benefits on both sides to maybe going down on that road. Now, to your point, you're exactly right. I mean, this is a hard cap world. There are some things. I mean, the Jets are probably in a better position than a lot of other teams to actually consider it. But there's a lot to be gained for both. And if it actually worked out positively, I mean, never mind the redemption story, which would be incredible. I think you're maybe setting up an opportunity to keep a guy like that here beyond the 2 years at something that makes sense for him, because you've kind of had the grass isn't always greener experience somewhere else. And I joked earlier today and earlier on the other shows, like, if I'm Davis Payne, I'm like, this guy would look pretty good on that PP1 unit. I mean, they haven't had a shot like his since he and Buffalo left town.
Right.
And listen, I mean, it would be for the most part, an incredibly popular move. But there is risk involved. But again, we're talking about somewhat buying low. You're not taking on a 6 or 7 year contract like the Caps did with Dubois. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I think this should be something that, the organization strongly considers and tries to make happen.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to cost of acquisition for me, Huss. But yeah, I mean, Patrick loved it here. He was beloved here and continues to be beloved here. And he would be, absolutely everything that you said about for a team that's trying to generate positive, interest and selling season tickets, etc. But they wouldn't be doing it just for that. They would be doing it because they think that Patrick could, get back to the player that he was previously. And of course he'd be a weapon, but again, where would he fit? Who would he play with? I mean, what would it mean for Nikolai Ehlers? We got all kinds of different things. The tentacles on this scenario are kind of endless, but of course it should be something that is discussed. Is it a front burner issue? I mean, that only Kevin Cheveldayoff and his folks in the upper brass and management know for sure. What we also know, Huss, is this. I think you mentioned the player portion. I think that if the Jets are being honest with themselves, I'm guessing they wish that there were some things they had handled differently when it comes to the Patrik Laine situation.
Absolutely.
So I think when there is an opportunity, for growth on both sides, I would see why, potentially trying to have a reunion and getting back together would make sense, not just for the player and not just for the organization, but for both sides and what they could get out of it together. Now, again, are we just thinking this is perfect world, a Hollywood script type of situation? No, I mean, like, this is legit. The guy came here as an 18-year-old, left in his early 20s, and then kind of probably thought, oh man, what did I leave behind? Right. I mean, but again, live and learn, personal growth, organizational growth, all of these things. I mean, I don't think there are a ton of impediments outside of trying to make the money work and massaging it on that front. And because the cap is going up, it's a little bit easier to maneuver. But Huss, if there's not going to be a lot of retention, and from the reports that we've been hearing, now again, at the start of the negotiation, of course they don't want there to be a lot of retention. San Jose didn't want a lot of retention on Erik Karlsson either at the beginning, but at the end there was some retention. Now, if you can get the number to a manageable place, man, of course you'd be considering Patrik Laine, whether it's a top line spot or a second. Again, you could almost go to a 1A and 1B type of situation. Now, does Patrik fit a speed game and a defensive game like the Jets are playing? No, but not every player has to fit into the cookie cutter mold. This would be a guy that can help on a lot of fronts. And again, I think that, as wild as it may be to suggest, I think that at his age, Huss, Patrik Laine can still play some of his best hockey. It can be ahead of him. It doesn't have to only be behind him. And we know how great the years behind him were. So there's a level he needs to get back to. He's got to get healthy. He's had some terrible luck when it came to injuries in the last couple of years. There were seasons when he got off to a tremendous start and it didn't work out. But again, in terms of exploring the possibilities, I'd be shocked if the Jets haven't already explored the possibility and would be definitely keeping that sort of thing under wraps. But of course, they have to be at least considering it. And from where it goes from here, is anybody's guess. But it certainly has given us something to talk about during what is historically a very quiet time on the calendar, right?
And listen, and the fact, nothing was going to happen until he was out of the program. And now we can sort of legitimately have these conversations because it has been widely reported that both Columbus and Laine's camp are looking for a fresh start. We've heard reportedly that, maybe the cost isn't that high. In and around a mid, it's going to depend on a lot on what the salary, if you're asking a team to retain 50%, well, the cost is going to be significantly more, I would say. Is there a possibility, like I look at the Jets cap situation right now.
Sure.
And, it is a lot tighter for this upcoming season than it is the following season when you've got the likes of Iafallo coming off the books, Pionk coming off the books, Nemetsnikov, Appleton. Like they've got more wiggle room at that point. Could you see a scenario where maybe Columbus isn't retaining necessarily a percentage of the salary, but Laine would come to Winnipeg and in return, pick one of those players, Iafallo, Pionk, somebody that has a relatively significant cap hit for this season, but is not on the books next year for Columbus? Is that the way a deal like that could potentially be put together?
Well, it certainly would be. Again, it has to, money in and money out. If that's the way it's going to be, it's got to include one of those players that you mentioned, Huss, right? Otherwise, you can't get the money to be close enough to make it work, or else there's got to be, a Cole Sillinger. We've talked about Cole Sillinger in the Rutgers sweepstakes earlier on, right? You got a player on a sort of a more manageable salary on the way back in. But yeah, there's all kinds of ways to be creative about this for sure. And again, if you're Don Waddell, again, if this was a 5-year deal, then yes, that would be more palatable, or that would be more of an option. But you're right. For a team that's trying to be on the uprise, they would love to have guys that are true pros like an Iafallo or a Neil Pionk to help bring along some of their younger players, I think. So that all makes sense to me. Especially with Dean Evason, Huss. Dean Evason would know Neil Pionk very well. And, Columbus's defense is kind of in transition. David Jiricek is going to be on the team this year. Denton Matejchuk will be pushing for a job. So a veteran like that to work along Zach Werenski, I think would be a great idea for them. But again, there's lots of things that we don't know about what would be offered and what is on the table. If you're, again, I'm not saying this is a
I'm
good.
I'm just looking at scenarios that could work. Like,
God,
because,
you
again,
have to. Huss, I've thought of the same thing.
Yeah.
For sure, there's got to. If you're taking 8.75 in, then yes, you're moving out. If it's just for the sake of conversation, if it's Pionk and Iafallo, that's almost $10 million going out. So, but you'd probably want or need to have something coming back the other way, which is why I mentioned someone like Sillinger. And again, now if you're going even bigger, what about, we've talked about Columbus as a great fit for Rutgers. So all of a sudden now the deal becomes now it's a 5-player special, right? So again, I'm not saying that is going to work for either side, but I definitely could see a pathway for there to be a deal that's not maybe it's just Laine, but there's potential for there to be other things that are massive there because of what we mentioned already for Munshus, the relationship that McGroarty has with Gavin Brindley and Adam Fantilli, that is also undeniable. So, and again, this isn't just a teams trading their problems situation like it was when it was Dubois, Laine, and Roslovic, but there is a scenario that could easily make sense on both sides that Huss could make both teams better in some regards for where their current programs are at. So, hey, I'm here for the discussion. And again, this isn't just pie in the sky kind of, fantasy world kind of stuff, because there's a legitimate path for both of those for it to make sense for both sides. Now, again, is it front burner? I don't think so, but that could sure change after one phone call, Huss, right? I mean, that's the
phone calls are starting today. The phone calls are starting today, and that's why we're talking about it right now. I mean, listen, I've talked about this on the show before, and there was some romanticizing of the idea. However, I have talked myself into it, and just listening to you, Remo, get the Laine Watch graphic made up. I think we're going to be able to, we'll have some fun talking about the possibilities of this and staying on top of the situation over the course of the next month or so as we get closer.